That was past tense.
All right, well.
Oh, Pam.
Hi, good afternoon. Welcome back to 30 Frames a Second. It is my privilege to introduce the following guest to you. He is a member of the December 12th Coalition and a member of the Freedom Party. Two organizations that I actually very, very much respect. And I respect them because aside from the rhetoric of activism, they actually get down and dirty in the community and address issues that are of major importance to our community, the black and brown community. Issues of housing and issues related to charter schools and on. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce to you the incomparable Roger Wareham. What's up, my brother?
Hey, man, thanks.
Hey, it's
not incomparable.
Yeah,
I try my best.
Yeah. You're gonna have, and so we don't like neglect talking about it. On the 19th of May, you're gonna, well, tell us.
Sure. May 19th. Every May 19th, we celebrate the anniversary of the birth of Malcolm X. And for the past over 20 years, every May 19th, we celebrated that anniversary by asking stores on 125th Street between 5th and St. Nicholas to close down for a certain number of hours out of respect for Malcolm. And over that period of time, we've pretty much had upwards of about 90–95% compliance, occasionally 100% compliance with the stores. I mean, they bucked initially, but over the years they found that it's really in their best interest to do that, because all we're asking is that for 2 or 3 hours out of an entire year that they close down, and since they do business in our community on a street where Malcolm became famous, that they show some respect for our community since they're constantly taking money out. And so this May 19th, we're going to meet at 12 o'clock on the corner 125th Street and Adam Clayton Powell Boulevard by the State Office Building. And then at 1 o'clock, we'll set out and make our rounds of the stores. And it's a very, if you've never been out there when that happens, it's a very sort of exciting experience, because on one hand, everything shuts down. You hear the gates start coming down. Some stores close the entire time. I think the last 2 years, Verizon has just closed for the entire day. But you see the gates start clanging down. You know, we have some flyers up. And
yeah, I think we have a flyer. Maybe you could show it.
Yeah, and I know one time, Omwale is fond of telling this story, that this young boy was walking with his mother down the street, and he said, well, why is everything closed? Why can't we go eat or, go shopping? He said, because things are closed for Malcolm X. And he was like stunned, and it made an impression on him.
Right.
And so it's really making a statement, and it's saying that there's no finance involved in this. There's no, it's not going to be a Malcolm X Day sale. It's going to be, we take the time out to show respect for our, as Ossie Davis put it, our shining prince, our black shining prince. And normally on that day, we usually just do the shutdown, but this year, because of a couple of factors. One is that this is the United Nations has declared this the International Year for People of African Descent. So throughout this year, we being the December 12th Movement, have been putting on different events to commemorate and highlight that. But also because there is a concerted campaign going on by the United States and Western countries to destabilize and recolonize Africa. And we can see it now in the bombing of Libya, the sanctions campaign that is still being waged against Zimbabwe, what's going on in terms of the Sudan, the statelessness of Somalia, and what just happened in the Ivory Coast in terms of France and NATO coming in to remove President Gbagbo and replace him with President Ouattara. And the common thread in terms of those 5 countries is that those were the 5 countries that had taken the lead in refusing to have the African Command, the United States African Command, which they call AFRICOM, be on the African continent. And so now you can see that those countries that took a stand against that are being knocked down one by one. And so the program on that evening of May 19th at 6:30 at the Dempsey Multi-Service Center at 127 West 127th Street between Malcolm X and Adam Clayton Powell Boulevard.
Dempsey.
The Oberia Dempsey Center. We're going to be talking about Malcolm's legacy in the context of what's going on now, because Malcolm's legacy is relevant historically, but it's also important in terms of what does it mean in terms of what do we do now with the issues we face. Not what would Malcolm do, but what are the lessons that we've learned that we can now apply to our situation? Because that's what Malcolm was, one of the things he was brilliant at was making an analysis of what's going on and providing a way forward around what do we do about it. So at that program that evening, you know, I'm hoping that your viewing audience will come out to the Dempsey Center on May 19th at 6:30 to have it's going to be a discussion but also a dialogue in terms of what's happening and what do we do, and also to counter a lot of the propaganda that's going on in terms of what's happening in Libya. Because if Gaddafi in the Western press is being demonized, excuse me, in a similar way to the way President Mugabe in Zimbabwe is demonized when he began to take the question of the land back from the white settlers, or the descendants of the white settlers, and returning it to the Zimbabwean people. When they talk about Gaddafi on the media now, he's a madman, he's an autocrat, he's a dictator, he's going to kill his own people, although they never provide any evidence of that. But on the other hand, you have Nelson Mandela, who when he was released from prison said if it had not been for Gaddafi and Castro, we would not be free. And the funds he's provided for liberation struggles.
If you look at the economics of South Africa, in terms of black people, it's still a major disappointment.
It's still a major disappointment, right? Whereas Libya had the highest standard of living for its citizens in the country. They don't talk about that.
Right.
That they had the highest standard of living in terms of education, health, housing. So we want to counter some propaganda.
And they also have their sovereign funds. They talk about oil, but the oil is mostly related to European countries, France. But the things that they were doing specifically with their sovereign wealth funds in terms of Africa, in terms of the development of Africa, is unprecedented.
Right, because they were providing a way to free Africa from the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, because much of the poverty that exists in Africa now is, first of all, due to colonialism, then neocolonialism, and which came in the form of the restrictions that were put on them by the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund. In order for them to get funds, the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank would say, we're going to give you this money, but this is what you have to spend it on. And that was one of the first problems that they had with Zimbabwe, because Zimbabwe insisted that they were going to spend money on education and health and not on privatization of their wealth, and that was one of the first breaks. And several countries that have tried to do that have then had their funds cut off. So what Colonel Gaddafi was proposing was, we have enough wealth that we generate that we can provide that, and it won't be all of the restrictions, and we lend you this money, but this is, you got to spend it right back with us in order to get it.
And if you look at Libya prior to Gaddafi, I mean, Libya was like
the kingdom
broke, man. Libya was like Haiti broke. It was like one of the poorest countries on the planet. And today, it economically, it's just night and day. The recovery of Libya economically for its people is almost unprecedented. I can't think of a greater precedent in terms of developing their community. And like I said, the way that they reach out to other nations in Africa is also unprecedented.
Right. They've developed their community. They've developed, one of the things, one of the great propaganda points around Zionism is they said Israel created a garden out of a desert, but they never talk about the fact that Libya's done the same thing. They've
Right.
created a thing where the desert has actually bloomed. They
Right.
developed an underground infrastructure in terms of
They've also
in terms of water.
created a few graveyards out of some villages, but you know.
You know, so the Israelis, they don't talk about that.
Yeah, no,
But
they don't.
It
No.
brings up again the importance of programs like this, because most of our people get their information from mainstream media, and that's become more and more consolidated and more monopolistic, and they have one message, so you never get to see not just the other side, but the true side of what's going on.
Right, right. Now, I want to get more into this with you, but I have to honor a request by one of my producers. She wanted you to tell our viewing audience, because sometimes I just go by the assumption that people know what I'm talking about. The December 12th movement, where did that name spring from, and what does it refer to?
Certainly. The December 12th movement was originally the December 12th Coalition. It started in 1987.
I make a mistake.
Yeah, right. It started.
Yeah.
It shows how long you've been around.
I know.
It began in 1987. It began in response to a series. For those who were around in 1987, there was a period of intense racism throughout New York State, upstate, in the city. Just all sorts of things that happened over those few years. Eleanor Bumpers, Howard Beach.
Right,
you know,
right.
And there was just a lot of things.
The skinny young guy
of police.
named Nat. What was his name in the subway? Nathaniel.
Right. And
right.
I'm trying.
There's a lot of stuff.
There were a lot of incidents that were either police-initiated incidents or just white racist mob kind of incidents.
Right.
And so up in Orange County, there was a sister that we had met named Lily Howard, who had one or two of her sons were in jail. We had met her the previous summer when a couple of our people had been arrested when they were traveling upstate and charged and got these phony weapons charges that were put on them. And it was done by there was a thing called the Black Desk. It was an intelligence operation that had been initiated by the New York City Police Department to spy on what they call black militants.
Right.
And so our people were victims of that, and in the process of that previous summer, we had met Lily Howard, who was from that area. She called us in November and said that one of her sons had been in the jail, and that the guards had come in like in Klan outfits. They had turned, it was very cold, it was like November. They had turned off all the heat. They had hosed down the prisoners, who were almost all black and Latino, although Orange County is not predominantly black or Latino, but the people in the jail are, which is no surprise. Hosed it down, turned off the heat, and just acted out. And so she had called us because she had been very impressed the summer before when we had been in the court and had a face down with the judge who had ordered us out. We said we're not going anywhere, and had backed them up. And so she called for help. And so we were organizing a demonstration around that, and really just around the whole different series of things that have been happening in New York State in that period of time. And while we were organizing for the demonstration, she got word that this young sister named Tawana Brawley had been abused by the police. I mean, the whole thing that went on in Fishkill. And so Viola and Sonny Carson went with Lily, and they met with Tawana Brawley and the family and heard what their story was. And so the demonstration that we were organizing around the Orange County jail thing then became to encompass that as well. So we pulled together what was called the December 12th Coalition. There was a whole series of groups across New York State to have a demonstration in Newburgh, New York on December 12th, 1987. The police department or the Orange County went and got temporary restraining orders against having this demonstration. So a number of the organizations who were part of it, they got scared and they just said they weren't going to participate. Although it was questionable whether those temporary restraining orders were even legal, because it was basically a First Amendment issue.
Right.
So on December 12, 1987, the demonstration was around about 5,000 people converged on Newburgh, some from upstate in Buffalo and Albany, and a number of buses came up from the city. And the coalition initially was formed with, it was us, December, we weren't December 12th at that point.
Right,
you know,
right.
We were part of a citywide coalition against police brutality. And Sonny Carson, we also the Black Men's Movement Against Crack, which had begun we began that in '86.
Right.
So we call that, it was Sonny Carson who was part of that. Sharpton had just come in. He had been trying to be involved, and folks were a little skeptical. We agreed to have him come in on the basis that we work collectively, that when we decide on something, everybody has to do it. Once we decide on it, we thrash it out, but once we decide, he said he would agree to that. And so he participated. The Nation of Islam came in at the last minute, Minister Farrakhan. And that was interesting because that was the first time he had participated in a march, because he said that's not what he did, and people said, well, in this one, to participate in it, you're going to have to march, and he marched. And so it was a very good demonstration. And then the following week, we came back and had what we call a Day of Outrage in New York on December 21st. And the idea of the Day of Outrage was that with all the incidents of racism going on in New York, we said there cannot be business as usual if we're being attacked and our human rights are being violated, our civil and our human rights are being violated. So the idea of the Day of Outrage was we were going to shut down transportation in New York. Although people didn't know what the plan was. There were only about 5 people who actually knew what the plan was. It was just that people were going to gather. We told everybody to bring a token. Back in the days when people had tokens, before Metro cards, and
little tokens,
yeah,
too, not the big ones.
Yeah, little tokens. Bring a token. Come meet down by the Cadman Plaza at, I think it was like 3 o'clock, and we had a plan where we were going to stop bridges, trains, you know, things. We had some people we had contact with who were subway train drivers, operators. And so we had a thing. We divided the group up. Different groups were going to go to different spots, and then we did that. And basically we backed traffic up on the streets and on the trains, all the way up to the Bronx. And so it was out of that that December 12th really grew. And it was very interesting because the next day the Times had an article. On one hand, they talked about the military-like surgical precision of what happened in Brooklyn that stopped everything, and then on the next column it talks about the beginning of what the Palestinians call the Intifada in Palestine. So it was like both of those things began at the same time. So it was out of that the December 12th coalition grew, and then without going into a whole lot of detail, it eventually became the December 12th movement. Some of those groups that were originally part of it dropped out and from that and went their own ways
in other directions. Right.
And so we continued our work in the streets, but we also began to do a lot of international work as well in terms of the legacy of Malcolm, and who raised that we've got to do work both nationally and internationally. We have to take our situation to the international arena. So the following year, next year, 2 years later, in '89, we began going to the United Nations Commission on Human Rights in Geneva, Switzerland, to raise the issue, initially of political prisoners, but then, to broaden it to just the situation of black folks in the United States. And so we've been going there since 1989, usually twice a year, at least once a year, to raise those issues and to establish a presence in the international arena. And I guess in terms of December 12th people, I'm the one who's gone the most often. We usually try to send 2 or 3 people, but if we can only afford one, usually I'm the one, just because, given my legal background, it's an area in which I can function. So I must have been there probably around 40 times over the last 20 some odd years. But in the international, we've made the situation of black folks in the United States an issue that had to be dealt with, and we're successful in 2001 at the United Nations World Conference Against Racism in Durban, in helping to organize the motion that led to the United Nations declaring the transatlantic slave trade and slavery as crimes against humanity, and that reparations were due. And so that's been part of the work that December 12th does, internationally, while we're doing our national and, street work here.
Yeah, right.
I hope she's satisfied. I hope she's satisfied.
As I said, the December 12th movement, is one of those the few movements that does entail movement, and even the way you summarize hitting the streets and going international does not do justice to the fact that you actually go international. You've been to Zimbabwe. You have actually sued New York City over the Kathy Black situation. That you do put hands in the community as opposed to like calling a meeting and discussing this guy's book and that guy's book and, you know, the political ramifications therefore of being a scholar in a being on the Bill Maher show, and you know. So I really respect that, and as you've alluded to yourself, you're an attorney. You know, you're an attorney in America, and I mean, you're articulate and clean. You could be the president.
You know, we have a similar academic background. It's really funny. We did a reverse. He went to Columbia and then to Harvard. I went to Harvard and went to Columbia.
Yeah, see that?
And Eric Holder is one of my classmates, the Attorney General. Yeah, so. But no, that's not. Yeah, it's Harlem Hospital. There's no doubt about it. But I think December 12th believes we believe that people make history, that masses of people make history, and so that you can't talk about, you can't complain about what's going on, you can't observe what's going on, and not do anything about it. And if you understand that the driving force of changing that are people, then you've got to be in the streets to try and help them be clear on what the nature of the issue is and what's the best way to get at it. And so that's what we try to do in terms of, based on our practice, on our study of theory, and on our history, to say, these are the issues. I mean, the issues we talk about are the issues that people talk about, but then it's a question of how do you go about dealing with it. So, so for instance, when you said with the Kathy Black issue, when we first read about him, the mayor appointing her, we took a two-prong approach. One was we had a press conference to denounce it, held demonstrations at the Tweed building, passed out information to people in the communities, held demonstrations in front of her house at 81st Street and Park Avenue, which she was not happy about at all, and neither were her neighbors. But it was like there's not going to be any place where we're not going to be where you can get away. And at the same time, we brought a lawsuit. There were 3 lawsuits brought. We brought one of the lawsuits because even though we thought we had a good basis, but the question of having a good basis for a lawsuit and winning a lawsuit are not necessarily the same thing. But the important thing was to challenge it in every venue. And even after the lawsuit was defeated and we filed a notice of appeal, and she got on TV and made one of those famous statements like, the Titanic is unsinkable. She said, I'm here, get over it, I'm not going anywhere. We continue to demonstrate. And so when she went down after 3 months, it wasn't a surprise. And we think we were very instrumental in that because we continued to raise the issue with people. We went to meetings where she was supposed to be. Some of them she didn't show up to. And so from that we think that was important, but it's not enough, because the real problem with the Kathy Black issue is the mayor. Because it's the mayor who unilaterally decided that he was going to appoint somebody who had no qualifications because he wanted to, and because she was part of his clique, because she had a history in terms of money management, and that the real issue for the mayor, from our view, was the $23 billion of the state education budget. Because
how you spend it. And,
and who it goes to. The mayor has entered office worth $5 billion. The mayor is now worth $20 billion.
Impressive.
Yes, it's amazing what you can do when you're devoting full time to being a mayor.
Talk about incomparable.
But the education budget is an example of our children in particular being reduced to a commodity, because in my view the mayor's concern around education has nothing to do with education, the real education of our children. It's a question of how can that be manipulated for the benefit of others. Klein, who left as a chancellor, went immediately to work for Rupert Murdoch. He's Rupert Murdoch's education technology consultant at a salary, they say, of $4.5 million.
Right.
And Murdoch in December bought, I forget the name of it, it's a wireless education technology company that gets 90% of its business from the city of New York.
Right.
And so it becomes real incestuous and nepotism. And so Kathy Black was brought in our view, to continue to manage that process, that business, and that she was going to deal with it as a business.
Right.
And so she became such an albatross with her public statements and her lack of managerial expertise or just familiarity with the system.
And a lack of diplomacy.
Yeah.
When you're used to being the king, it's very hard for you to be a
Bite
diplomat.
your tongue, right, and say, well, maybe the problem with overcrowding is birth control, and closing these schools is a Sophie's choice.
Right.
And then people were quitting on her. The people who actually know what to do in the Department of Education were quitting, those higher ups. And so Bloomberg, he never admits he's wrong. He just changes, and so he appoints Dennis.
Well, I think he sincerely believes he is just far superior to everyone. I don't think. I mean, I think if he thought he was wrong, he might admit it just to be superior again. But he really believes that he is far more intelligent to anyone else. That the proof is in the fact that he has more money than anybody else in New York City. He just believes that he's a tremendous money manager, and that's what New York needs.
And that's what New York needs.
And he's just secure in his position.
And and that's why once Kathy Black was gone, and people say, well, you know, Dennis Walcott's the person, and he's black, and he's had this. Our position was that Dennis Walcott's not the issue.
Correct.
The issue is that there should have been an open process.
Correct.
And the reason that there's no open process is because the legislature gave Bloomberg what he wanted and gave him complete and total control over the public education system in New York. And so we've started a campaign to end mayoral control over education. So we've been out in the streets for the last 3 weeks with petitions, getting signatures of people in New York City that we can take to the legislature and say they've got to roll back this legislation. This should not be in the hands of one person, whoever the mayor is. That one person should not be in control of 1.1 million students in a $23 billion budget.
And the politicians, specifically the city council, but many of the politicians, if not most of the politicians that we trusted and voted for, abrogated all authority. They just like, they would probably take offense to me saying they sold us down the river. But I just think they just reverted to their slave self and abrogated all authority to Christine Quinn and Mike Bloomberg, and the ramifications have been devastating, just devastating on our community. I am so heartbroken. I talked to you, and it has been my pleasure to have done this quite a while. So behind the scenes, I've done a lot of shows related to many of the members in the December 12th coalition, as well as Freedom Party members. Inez Barron, I have done shows with Inez Barron, and I am just like floored by how brilliant this woman is. And the ease of operation. She's like Nat King Cole on the keyboard. She's just a master, and she's so at ease being so intelligent. And then I look at the charter school system, where you take education and you throw the names in a hat and you like hit the number. And I think to myself that in such a situation like that, it would be very, very, very unlikely that someone like an Inez Barron or a Roger Wareham could develop under those circumstances, unless you hit the lotto, you know, because they have completely ignored the real issue in leveling the playing field and addressing the needs of the public school system itself.
Right.
And they have said, well, we're gonna let people throw their name in a hat, and whoever come out the hat, you know, we're gonna give them this charter school education because that's all we got. That's fine, but how does that address how we develop our best and brightest minds if they're relegated to like hitting a number? You know, I'm born and raised in Harlem. I'm from Harlem Hospital myself, yeah. And I see people growing up, young people who are so gifted, I mean just unbelievably gifted, who will never have an opportunity, you know. And it seems like nobody just addresses the unfairness of a charter school system and the ramifications, the devastating ramifications of not having our best and brightest having an opportunity to develop on their own terms, just leveling the playing field.
Well, you've touched on several issues there. One is just a real good public school system should provide everybody
right.
with a quality education and access to similar resources so that everyone can develop to the maximum of their capability.
Correct.
Which is just a basic sort of thing. And interestingly enough, one of the things that Zimbabwe has a tremendous education system, mm-hmm. and you know that it's been under attack since the sanctions campaign, but have a tremendous education system. Another is this mythology of the charter schools, mm-hmm. because part of the mythology of the charter schools is that it's a significantly better education, or they're getting better results than the public schools. When in fact, I think a number of the studies, and I think Charles Barron has a lot of this, there's not a significant difference right. in terms
if any, sometimes
of the results. Right.
Right. Right.
Although they do have better, they have smaller classes, they have better equipment.
Right.
And then the unfairness of whether you get in.
And they also have the opportunity to eliminate those
right,
who are not.
That's another right.
You know,
they eliminate
you know,
those who they consider to be dragging.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
the ones who they might say this might be a special ed student.
Right, right,
they'll eliminate them. So then they've reduced their common denominator.
Right. And public schools don't have multi-million-dollar budgets.
Right.
You know, I mean, in a public school, if you can't account for $100,000, they make it seem like you're, you know, the worst person in the world. And many charter schools have multi-million-dollar budgets. It's just
right. And in some instances, the charter schools are in many instances, the charter schools are in public schools, which means that the public schools that they're in, they're co-located, they're not paying rent, right. So that means they have more money, and these are private bodies, these charter schools, right. So their profit level is increasing. They're eliminating space that the other students in the public schools will no longer have. So now you have sometimes children having lunch at 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning because there's so many children that need to use the lunchroom, or art rooms or music rooms being eliminated, library space being eliminated or reduced. So now you're creating a situation that just worsens what actually exists. So the real problem is a failure of the city to commit itself to providing a real strong systemic education for all these children, so that there are a lot of best and brightest who never get the opportunity to develop.
Right.
Not just the ones who develop and excel, but there's a lot of them who just get so discouraged.
Right.
And you see them as you grow up, people you grew up with who may not have done well in school, but have done other things, and you say, that's a bad,
right.
you know? Right.
There's so many different ways that the mind takes different people. You know, I mean, some people have musical aptitude. Some people are just as artistic as Jacob Lawrence. You know, you should have an opportunity. School should be a place where you can develop according to what, you know,
what your interests
interests are. I mean, if you're in a classroom That's one of the problems that I had in school. I mean, I could pass a freaking test, you know, an academic test, but my heart was in like music, but I didn't have any of the stuff that I really wanted to do. So, you know, I was not that enamored with school per se. But we're in the 21st century now. You know, I mean, I started school in the last half of the 20th century,
you
but
and me both.
We're in the 21st century now. And it seems to me that it is insulting, first of all, to fire 5,000 teachers and even entertain the thought of having charter schools where you have public money going into these institutions. But it seems like Bloomberg, for lack of a better phrase, the white supremacist mindset is about doing everything except providing a level playing field so that our children can compete with their children mano a mano.
Right, because they know you don't find charter schools in communities that are predominantly white.
No, you don't.
You know,
no, you don't.
You know, Bloomberg's campaign is particularly to make Manhattan just for rich white people.
Right, right.
But no point in me repeating what you said. That's what it is. It's racism expresses itself in many forms and in many aspects of our lives. Education is one of the key ones because, you know, like our parents told us, you know, if I can't give you anything else, I'll give you I'll make sure you get a good education so you can function. Our children are not getting the type of education that will allow them to survive in a 21st century economy. They're getting an education that directs them to go to be slaves in prison, because that is where slavery is still legal. Under the 13th Amendment of the Constitution, slavery is legal in prison, and that's what happens in those prisons where, in order to get the good time to get out, you got to work, and you work for pennies, and you work for these corporations, and it's slavery. And so our children are not being prepared for the 21st century, and it's almost, it's like we have no utility anymore.
Aggressively not being prepared for the 20, not coincidentally not being prepared.
It's not collateral damage. It's like a smart bomb directed.
Correct. And what makes it even more insidious is at the same time that the court system itself is telling you that they have no responsibility other than to provide our children an 8th grade education. In the city council, they are undertaking exploratory an exploratory posture to find out whether or not they should institute what do they call it, fair as opposed to minimum wage, fair wage legislation, which would basically eliminate the minimum wage, would basically eliminate anyone who is not highly capable of defending themselves in their position, you know, on an academic or intellectual level of some sort. You have to be, just to compete in a society where low-cost rent is defined as anything under than $1,000. And they're talking about eliminating minimum wage and going for fair wage, which would only make available those jobs for skilled people. It would seem very insidious to provide our children, the kind of miseducation that they're providing to our face.
Right, and it's really, if you look at it, it becomes a form of educational genocide.
Correct.
You know, because you're not being prepared to live.
Correct.
And then they'll say, well, then it becomes self-fulfilling. Well, they're not very smart, they don't do well because they're not very bright, and it reinforces the historical racist stereotype that we're just a little less than human, so that anything that happens to us is okay. And so they're in jail, they belong in jail.
We're bad and we're stupid.
It becomes a catch-22,
Now, some of your positions, you guys have been deified for.
Deified or vilified?
Vilified. Well, both probably, but vilified.
Being deified.
Both probably, but vilified. See, I told you it was smart. But
I went to white folks' school.
Yeah,
so
I did too, but it was Catholic school, so you know, deity just pops into my head.
They got you programmed, right?
Yeah. Well, they get mad at you for that. They're like, you know, oh, black Jesus. But vilify. Your position on charter schools, obviously your position on Black Hitler, Mugabe.
You should clear up what they mean by that.
I don't know. They never tell me what they mean.
That's the demonization.
Right.
Anybody that gets equated with Hitler, obviously they want to portray as being anti-human, and you know, and that was one of the.
But they only let you do that with black people. They don't let you like compare white people to Hitler because they like, no, Hitler, you know, how dare you?
True. That's true. But the case study of what they did with President Mugabe it's a case study of media manipulation, and it's something that our community should be aware of. You know, Malcolm said, you know, they'll have you thinking right is wrong and up is down, and your friend is your enemy and your enemy is your friend. And so if you look at if you track the history of how the Western media treated President Mugabe from 1980 when Zimbabwe got independence, and he decided not to prosecute or execute Ian Smith, who was the head of the white settler regime, who was definitely a war criminal and had committed crimes against humanity, and who made a Kathy Black statement that when they seized power, that whites were going to rule for 1,000 years, and that lasted about 12 years. You know, and that there was an agreement that for the first 20 years after independence, that the first 10 years, whites would have a disproportionate membership in the parliament out of proportion to their actual numbers in the population, and that they could arrange.
Which is very
they could
small.
arrange
they
to sell.
Own everything.
Yeah, they could arrange to sell the property, and so as long as he went along with that, he was fine. He was a member of the British Empire. He was a lord. He was a lord. He was the model of African presidents. At the point in time when he said enough. Basically, he did one of those pale-faced, speak with forked tongue, you know, moments, and he said, "I can see we're still not getting our land, and y'all still have the land, and we have the poverty," and instituted the first time when an African government said, "We're taking our land back and giving it to our people." Overnight, he went from the angel to the devil, and then he became Black Hitler. He became a dictator. But we have to become really astute in terms of how we become manipulated, and your viewing audience has a responsibility to let other people know that this type of program exists, so that people can get some other information around what's going on, because that's really key in the 21st century where there's so much information that you can drown in information. So now you've got to become analytical and astute in terms of picking and choosing where are there reliable sources of information.
You also have to take a moment and breathe after you take in information, and just get in touch with the logic of a situation, you know. Because a lot of times it's misdirection. It's like the Monty in three-card Monty, you know. And when you sit down and you analyze it, you come to the conclusion, wait a minute, that makes no sense. In point of fact, we are rooting against, they have us rooting against our own survival. It is somehow unpatriotic to think that black people should prosper and develop in their own country, or that black people should prosper and develop in their own community, or that that black people who have been in this country since before it was a country, contributing in every single way you could think of, economically, militarily, are somehow not American enough for people who got here day before yesterday. You know, the fact that they are able to put this propaganda out is one thing. The fact that we subscribe to it sometimes is just unbelievable to me.
That's the post-traumatic slave syndrome.
That's some slave mind to the nth degree thing. I'm not even sure what that is.
Which is once again the education issue. I mean, the indoctrination you get in school And if you get a real education, teaches you to think critically. It teaches you to look between the lines, to analyze what's not being said. The type of education that's being propagated in New York now is just to regurgitate. You know, it's the banking concept that Paulo Freire talked about in the pedagogy of the oppressed, as opposed to an education that really makes you think and analyze. When I used to teach at the College of New Rochelle School of New Resources, we had a class called Experience, Learning, and Identity, and it was like an entry-level class for students, mainly Black and Latino women who had been out of school since high school and decided in their late 20s or 30s to go back to school. And one of the things, you know, I mean, it's the same thing I would do when I was teaching at John Jay around the corner from here, and tell students that I would penalize them if they didn't question things I said. That I didn't want them to accept things simply because I said it, and I'm the teacher, and I'm standing up front, and you just want to get a grade by just agreeing with me. I want you to, if you don't agree with it, to challenge it. You're not going to be penalized for challenging it. You will be penalized for going along with it when in the dialogue it becomes clear that you don't really agree with it, but you don't want to challenge it. And so that's the type of education that you want, because then it's a critical method of thinking, and that's what we need in terms of our community, we need in terms of our youth, if we're going to survive in this 21st century. And you know, I think earlier you talked about the question of development, that when we look at our situation here in this country and around the African diaspora, we suffer from a case of enforced underdevelopment. And that's why the demand for reparations is so important. You know, the demand to repair the damage that was done to our community from the transatlantic slave trade, through slavery, through Jim Crow, through the civil rights era, right through to 2011, where we're dealing with de facto racism in every aspect of our lives. And we never have a level playing field. And the issue of reparations is to create a level playing field in terms of every sphere of our life, you know, in terms of education, in terms of health, because there was a book that came out a few years ago by this husband and wife team at Harvard, a Black man and woman, that traces the health issues that faced Black folks in the 21st century to the vestiges of coming out of slavery. So there's always a continuum in terms of that. And so, you know, the December 12th Movement takes the position that the key issue for our community in the 21st century is reparations, and not reparations in the sense of you go and open your mailbox and there's a check there, but reparations to our community collectively, so that we would have issues that dealt with us collectively around healthcare, around preventive health, prevention, and not, you know, around controlling media of our own, around an education system that speaks to our interests. And so, if we can't do that, if we can't begin to see what those issues are and why reparations is important and how different things flow from that, we're going to be there's no guarantee we'll come out of the 21st century here, because everything here is tailored towards really taking us off the agenda. And, you know, we take a lot of flack because when President Obama was running, we supported President Obama. We still support. We don't support all his policies, but we think it is important that simply by him being president, he keeps the issue of Black folks on the agenda, nationally and internationally. He may not want to deal with it, but his presence. As
soon as I see his face.
That's the just rabid response of the far right racists and the more subtle response of the more debonair racists.
Not so subtle. Let me see your report card. I mean, that was like, you know, that was.
It keeps us on the agenda.
Crass.
And as long as if we understand it, it'll help us organize, because one of the things I think our youth do suffer from is they don't have the historical or the contemporary context that you and I came out of, in terms of folks who came out of the South, out of Jim Crow, out of the type of racism that you found in the North, and it influenced how we develop, it influences how we think, and it influences our analysis of what's going on. And I think it helps us keep it real in terms of really understanding what's going on, that we can get past all the slick words or just the real blatant stuff to see what this is about and what it is we need to move forward.
Now, you talked about all the slick words and how we perceive things, and you talked about historical context.
Mm-hmm.
And I think about a phenomenon that happened and how it's continuing today differently.
Okay. Specifically,
the 3/5 rule. A lot of people think that the 3/5 rule was somehow set up to denigrate blacks. It was not.
Right.
It was
incidental.
Correct. There was already no law that whites that pertained to blacks that whites had to you know, go upon. The 3/5 rules was instituted to bring money and representation to slaveholding countries.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward till today, and the prison system, where prisoners are now counted in the counties of the prisons they are in, as opposed to their communities. Right. Thus, the Deep South gets, you know, the representation and the money that goes with counting these slaves, and their own communities don't.
Right. Well, it's like you said, it's economics. It's always been economics.
Right.
What brought us here was economics.
Right.
It was a business venture, and then they developed the ideological superstructure of racism. That was developed to justify the business. They, you know, they considered themselves Christians, and they had to rationalize how could Christians enslave other human beings. So then they had to make the other human beings subhuman. So you develop a whole ideology that says to justify that these people aren't human, and it's continued to that day. And that's one of the things. We have
a call, so I gotta let you know at least a caller get a question into you.
No problem.
Caller, if you're there and you can put the call through. Let it fly.
Can you hear anything?
No, I don't hear anything. Maybe they don't have the speakers up or something. Okay, as soon as you get that call, as soon as you figure it out, put it through.
Hello?
Yeah, hi, how you doing, caller?
Yes, I would just like to say that to your guest that in reference to his statements concerning President Mugabe, do you actually think that people will believe such a fantastic story about Mr. Mugabe? Just over a month ago, President Obama was the host of an organization known as the Women of Zimbabwe. And at that meeting, he referred to President Mugabe as a ruthless and unprincipled despot. These women from Zimbabwe were given medals because of their opposition in Zimbabwe of the persecution inflicted upon the people of Zimbabwe by this man. Also, as a black man sitting in New York City in your very expensive suit, I do not know how you can defend the regimes of Saharan Africa, in particular Libya, where Africans are being specifically hunted down and murdered, lynched in Libya. Anyone who knows Africa knows that in Saharan Africa, people from the south, from sub-Saharan Africa, are treated with contempt. With contempt, my friend.
All right. I think I understand the gist of your question. I'm going to let Roger take the question, and I don't want to get this into a back and forth because we're running out of time. I would love to address your question. You don't know, but I will let my guest address your question. But I will say this. We was talking about white folks getting all the money all the time, and you have not addressed that issue. You have not addressed the fact that in Zimbabwe, that a small minority of people control all the money all the time. So you go and you tell them to give up the money, and then you come back and you call whoever you want names. We were talking about economics, but I will allow, in deference to my guest, who is quite articulate, I will allow him to address your question.
I don't know if I can address all of it because we have a short period of time.
Yeah, we only have a couple of minutes.
The fact that President Obama called President Mugabe a despot is in line with what the U.S. policy is towards Zimbabwe. The United States in 2001, the United States with put in the sanctions that was sponsored by Jesse Helms, the very racist senator from North Carolina, to sanction Zimbabwe and to cut off all aid to Zimbabwe until such time as the President of the United States decided that democracy had been restored to Zimbabwe. This followed the land reform program, which took land from the 4,000 settlers that had 85% of the most arable land in Zimbabwe and returned it. And there was a process by which it was returned to over 400,000 individuals and families in Zimbabwe for small plots as well as large plots. That situation is still going on. And even the United Nations has been forced to admit that despite all of the lies that have been told around this went to President Mugabe's cronies, of which he must have had a lot of cronies since it went to over 400,000 people and families, that there has been an increase in terms of the distribution of land and in the wealth of the land. And the real holdup in terms of development has been the fact that they didn't have the resources, largely tied to the sanctions that were put on them by the United States and the UK and the United Kingdom. They've begun to deal with that through trade with China, who has provided heavy-duty materials without any of the restrictions that are put on them by the West. My defense of the question of what's going on in Libya is that those who say that all those things that supposedly were going on that justified the bombing of Libya in contravention of international law, in contravention of the resolution that was passed by the United Nations, they had no proof of it. There was a story the other day where they talked about in one area, I'm not sure if it was Benghazi or another city, where this fighting had been going on, that only 2% of women had died. And if there had been indiscriminate shelling of civilians, the percentage of women that had been killed would have been about 50%. There's a civil war going on in Libya, just like there was a civil war in the United States, and people died on both sides. So it doesn't require international intervention by the United States, France, the UK, and NATO to settle a civil war, except that you want to engage in regime change against a leader that you have political problems with. The United States...
I'm going to have to cut you off, brother, because I got
this got me going.
I know, it got you. We got to wrap up. I'd like to thank my guests for being here. I just want to say it's ironic that you brought up Obama and a group of people when the president has been called everything but a child of God by a small group of people. But we'll get into that some other time. Roger, again, tell us about the 19th real quick, and Dempsey Center. And
Thursday, May 19th. At 12 o'clock, we're going to meet at the State Office Building to do the shutdown of stores on 125th Street. 6:30, the Dempsey Center, 127 West 127th Street, to deal with Malcolm's legacy and what's going on in Libya and Zimbabwe and attacks in Africa.
Thank you, brother. Peace. Have a good day. Excellent, excellent, excellent.
Yeah, you know, your hour went by then.
Yeah, well.